You wake up in the morning and there's already this weight in your chest, but it's not yours. It's from your mom who called yesterday worried about the bills. It's from your coworker going through a messy divorce. It's from that story you saw on social media about a family losing their home. And you carry all of this like it's your own pain being carved into your flesh, don't you? If you're one of those people who feels others' pain like your own skin is being cut. If you can't watch a sad movie without crying for the next 3 days. If you walk into a room and immediately know someone's hurting even when they're smiling, then you need to hear what I'm about to tell you, because what you think is your greatest virtue might actually be your greatest prison. In just a few minutes, I'm going to show you how Carl Jung, the father of analytical psychology, discovered something so profound about sensitive souls like you that it will completely flip everything you believe about empathy on its head. But I'm warning you right now, once you see this, you can never unsee it, and the person you've been pretending to be, the one who takes care of everyone else's emotions, that version of you won't survive what I'm about to reveal. You see, there's something Jung called the shadow, and for empaths, for people like you who feel everything so deeply, your shadow isn't what you think it is. Most people think the shadow is their dark side, their anger, their selfishness. But for you, your shadow is actually your inability to not care. Your shadow is the part of you that's so terrified of being seen as selfish that you've become an emotional sponge, soaking up everyone else's feelings until you can't tell where you end and they begin. Let me paint you a picture that's going to make your stomach turn because it's going to hit so close to home. You're at a family dinner, and your aunt starts talking about how stressed she is at work. Immediately, your chest tightens. Your breathing gets shallow. You start offering solutions, asking questions, trying to fix her problems, but here's the thing. She never asked you to. She was just venting. But you absorbed her stress like a paper towel soaks up spilled wine, and now you're carrying her work anxiety along with your own life challenges. Or maybe it's your friend who's always calling you when they're having relationship drama. 2 hours later, you're off the phone feeling emotionally drained, like you just ran a marathon. You tell yourself it's because you're a good friend, because you care. But deep down there's this nagging feeling, this exhaustion that you can't quite shake. That's not caring. That's emotional vampirism, and you're the one being drained. Here's what Jung understood that most people miss entirely. He said, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. But for empaths, it's the opposite. Everything that hurts others automatically hurts you, and that's not empathy. That's a complete loss of psychological boundaries. You know what the most dangerous part is? You've probably been praised for this your whole life. Oh, you're so sensitive. You're such a good listener. You really understand people. And every time someone said that, it reinforced this pattern. It made you believe that your value as a human being was tied to how much you could absorb other people's emotional chaos. But Jung saw through this completely. He realized that when you feel everything, you actually feel nothing authentically. When you're constantly tuned into everyone else's emotional frequency, you lose access to your own inner voice. You become like a radio that picks up every station at once. Just noise, static, emotional confusion. Think about this for a second. When was the last time you sat in complete silence and asked yourself, what do I actually feel right now? Not what I picked up from my mom's phone call, not what I absorbed from that sad news story, not what my friend dumped on me yesterday. What do I, in my core, actually feel? I bet you can't answer that question easily, and that's the problem. Jung called this psychological infection. He said that when you have no emotional boundaries, you become infected by every psychological state you encounter. It's like walking through a hospital without any protective equipment. You're going to catch something, and it's going to make you sick. But here's where it gets really twisted. The reason you do this, the reason you absorb everyone's pain, isn't actually because you're more caring than other people. It's because you're terrified of being alone with your own emotions. You're so scared of facing what's really going on inside you that you'd rather carry the weight of the entire world's problems than sit still long enough to deal with your own. This is your shadow speaking, the part of you that would rather be overwhelmed by other people's drama than underwhelmed by your own emptiness. The part of you that has convinced itself that feeling everyone's pain makes you special, makes you valuable, makes you needed, and you are needed, but not as an emotional dumping ground. You're needed as yourself, your authentic self, the person you are when you're not performing emotional rescue operations for everyone around you. Jung discovered something incredible through his work. He found that the most sensitive people, the ones who feel everything, are often running from the biggest shadow of all, The fear that if they stop taking care of everyone else, no one will want them around. The fear that their real personality, their authentic self isn't interesting enough, isn't valuable enough, isn't lovable enough. So they become emotional chameleons. They mirror back whatever energy they receive. Someone's sad, they become sad. Someone's anxious, they become anxious. Someone's angry, they take on that anger and try to fix it. But in all of that mirroring, all of that absorbing, they lose themselves completely. I want you to imagine something right now. Imagine waking up tomorrow morning and the first emotion you feel is actually yours. Not your partner's mood, not your boss's stress from yesterday, not your mother's worry about your future. Just yours. Can you even imagine what that would feel like? Most people who've been emotional sponges their entire lives literally cannot conceptualize this. They've been so busy feeling everything else that they've forgotten how to feel themselves. It's like they've been wearing someone else's clothes for so long that they forgot what their own skin feels like. This is what Jung meant when he talked about individuation, the process of becoming who you actually are instead of who everyone else needs you to be. And for empaths, for sensitive souls like you, individuation requires something that feels almost impossible at first. It requires you to stop caring about other people's emotions long enough to discover your own. Now I know what you're thinking, but if I stop caring about others, doesn't that make me selfish? Doesn't that make me a bad person? And right there, that thought, that fear, that's your shadow talking again. That's the voice that has convinced you that your worth is measured by how much emotional labor you perform for others. But Jung would tell you something revolutionary. He'd tell you that you cannot truly care for others until you learn to care for yourself. You cannot give what you don't have. And if you don't have emotional boundaries, if you don't have a sense of your own authentic feelings, then what you're giving isn't care. It's codependency. There's a story Jung tells about a patient of his, a woman who was so sensitive that she could walk into a room and immediately start crying if someone else was sad. She thought this made her special, gifted even. But Jung saw something different. He saw someone who was so disconnected from her own emotional center that she had to borrow feelings from everyone around her just to feel alive. Through their work together, she discovered something shocking. When she finally learned to sit with her own emotions, when she stopped absorbing everyone else's energy, she realized that most of what she thought was empathy was actually fear. Fear of being rejected, fear of being seen as uncaring, fear of being alone. And here's the beautiful part of the story. Once she learned to feel her own feelings first, once she established those emotional boundaries, she became truly empathetic for the first time in her life. Because real empathy isn't feeling someone else's pain as if it were your own. Real empathy is understanding someone else's pain while remaining grounded in your own emotional center. It's the difference between drowning with someone and throwing them a life preserver. When you absorb their emotions, you're drowning with them. When you maintain your boundaries while still caring, you're throwing them something that can actually help. But here's where most people get this completely wrong. And it's why you're probably still stuck in this pattern even though you know it's exhausting you. They think setting emotional boundaries means becoming cold, distant, uncaring. They think it means shutting down their sensitivity like it's some kind of emotional faucet you can just turn off. That's not what Jung discovered at all. What he found was far more nuanced and, honestly, far more powerful. Jung realized that your sensitivity isn't the problem. It's actually your superpower. But like any superpower, if you don't learn to control it, it controls you. Think about it like this. Superman's strength isn't a weakness, but if he couldn't control it, he'd destroy everything he touched. Your emotional sensitivity is the same way. It's incredible, it's rare, it's valuable, but without boundaries, it becomes destructive. So what does healthy empathy actually look like? What does it mean to feel deeply without drowning? First, you have to understand something fundamental about how emotional energy works. Every person has what Jung called their psychic space, their internal emotional environment. When you're constantly absorbing others' emotions, you're essentially letting everyone else redecorate your internal space. You wake up, and instead of your own emotional furniture, you're surrounded by everyone else's anxiety, depression, stress, and chaos. Healthy boundaries mean you get to decide who has access to your psychic space and under what conditions. It means you can care about your friend's divorce without taking on their heartbreak as if it were your own. It means you can support your mother through her financial stress without carrying her worry in your chest for weeks. Here's a practical example of what this looks like. Let's say your coworker comes to you complaining about their boss again. The old you, the emotional sponge version, would immediately feel their frustration, their anger, their sense of injustice. Your shoulders would tense up, your stomach would not, and you'd spend the rest of the day carrying their work drama around like a heavy backpack. But the new you, the you with healthy boundaries, responds differently. You listen to their complaint, you acknowledge their feelings, maybe you offer some perspective or support. But when they walk away, their emotions walk away with them. You don't take on their frustration because their frustration isn't your responsibility to carry. This isn't coldness. This is wisdom. This is what Jung meant when he talked about holding space for someone. You create a container for their emotions without becoming a container for their emotions. The transformation happens when you realize that people don't actually need you to feel their pain to validate it. They need you to witness it, to acknowledge it, to care about it. But they don't need you to carry it. In fact, when you stop carrying their emotional burden, something magical happens. They start carrying their own. They become more emotionally self-sufficient. They develop their own coping mechanisms. They grow stronger. When you're always there to absorb their pain, you're actually preventing their emotional development. You're like a parent who never lets their child fall because you're afraid they'll get hurt. But children need to fall to learn how to get back up. Adults need to feel their own emotions to learn how to process them. Jung had a term for this too. He called it individuation for others. When you stop enabling other people's emotional dependency, you force them to individuate, to become more whole and self-sufficient. You're not abandoning them. You're empowering them. But here's the part that's going to challenge everything you think you know about yourself. The reason this is so hard for you isn't just because you're sensitive. It's because somewhere along the way, you learned that other people's emotions were safer than your own. Maybe when you were a child, your own emotions were too big, too overwhelming, too dangerous to feel. Maybe you grew up in a household where someone else's emotions dominated everything. A depressed parent, an angry parent, a chaotic family system. So you learned to tune into their frequency instead of your own because it felt safer, more predictable. Or maybe you discovered early on that when you focused on other people's problems, you got attention, praise, validation. You became the family therapist, the friend everyone called in crisis, the person everyone could count on, and that felt good. Until it didn't. Now you're an adult, and you're still running that same program. You're still more comfortable in other people's emotional chaos than in your own inner silence. You'd rather solve everyone else's problems than sit with the discomfort of not having all the answers to your own life. This is what Jung called the helper's shadow. The dark side of being the person everyone turns to is that you never learn to turn to yourself. You become an expert at everyone else's psychology while remaining a stranger to your own. So how do you break this pattern? How do you maintain your beautiful sensitivity while protecting your own emotional sovereignty? Jung's approach was surprisingly simple, but it requires something most empaths find terrifying. You have to start saying no. Not to caring, not to supporting others, but to absorbing their emotional states as if they were your own. The next time someone starts dumping their emotional chaos on you, try this instead of immediately absorbing it. Take a deep breath and create what Jung called sacred space between you and their emotion. Imagine there's a protective bubble around your heart. You can still hear them, still care about them, still offer support, but their emotions bounce off your bubble instead of penetrating into your core. At first, this might feel selfish, cold, or wrong. That's your shadow talking. That's the part of you that has been trained to believe your value comes from how much emotional labor you perform. But here's what you'll discover. When you stop absorbing their emotions, you actually become more helpful, not less. Because now you can think clearly. Now you can offer genuine perspective instead of just reflecting back their chaos. Now you can be the calm in their storm instead of another person drowning in their flood. Jung worked with a man who was so empathically sensitive that he couldn't go to movies, couldn't watch the news, couldn't even walk through crowded places without becoming overwhelmed by everyone else's emotional energy. Through their work together, this man learned something revolutionary. He discovered that his sensitivity wasn't a burden to manage, it was a gift to direct. Instead of being a passive receiver of everyone's emotions, he learned to be an active chooser. He could tune in when it served a purpose and tune out when it didn't. He could feel deeply without losing himself. He could care powerfully without sacrificing his own emotional well-being. This is what's possible for you. This is what Jung called conscious empathy, the ability to feel with others while remaining rooted in yourself. It's empathy with wisdom, sensitivity with strength, caring with boundaries. The beautiful irony is that when you stop being an emotional sponge, you become far more valuable to the people you love, because now when you offer support, it comes from a place of choice rather than compulsion. When you help someone, it's because you want to, not because you can't help but absorb their pain. People can feel the difference. There's something deeply trustworthy about someone who cares for you without losing themselves in your problems. There's something profoundly healing about being heard and supported by someone who remains grounded in their own emotional center. This is your true gift, not the ability to take on everyone's pain, but the ability to witness everyone's pain with wisdom, compassion, and strength, not to drown with them, but to be the lighthouse that guides them back to shore. You are not meant to carry the world's emotional weight on your shoulders. You are meant to be yourself, fully, authentically, powerfully yourself. And from that place of authentic selfhood, you can offer something far more valuable than emotional absorption. You can offer presence, wisdom, and genuine care that doesn't cost you your own peace of mind. The person you're becoming, the one who feels deeply but doesn't drown, who cares powerfully but doesn't sacrifice themselves, that person is your authentic self, emerging from behind the shadow of compulsive empathy. That person has been waiting for you to discover them all along. Your sensitivity was never meant to be your prison. It was meant to be your gift to the world. But first, it has to be your gift to yourself.